Good morning, everyone. Welcome to HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We're coming to you today on a Wednesday morning. We typically do this every week, midweek. Last week, I chopped it up into a trilogy, had a lot to talk about. Went through Arkansas schedule. I did my SEC power rankings. We gave you some recruiting updates. We've got several pieces of intel today on some of Arkansas's five-star recruits as we shift into, um, late September football season, and then start moving into October, where you'll also have some overlap with Arkansas's exhibition season in basketball. There's gonna be a lot of opportunities for visitors, a lot of scheduled dates. One that may have just missed the target when Arkansas's home opener in Fayetteville against Alabama Birmingham last weekend, the only September game in Fayetteville. Originally, Arkansas had several prospects set to visit. That was whittled down to one, and it's looking like Arkansas didn't have a visitor last weekend, as it turns out. So we're going to get into recruiting. We're going to talk about other stuff. John Calipari, the head hog, was in Hot Springs earlier this week on Monday at the Arlington Hotel, giving a presentation. It was scheduled for an hour, went closer to an hour and a half, in front of high school coaches from around the state, the Arkansas Basketball Coaches Association's annual clinic. It moves around. This year it was at the Arlington in Hot Springs. I got to have a front row seat for that. Put out a lot of content on social media, some of it which drew attention from some of the media that covers Big Blue Nation Kentucky basketball. Some controversy sparked there. Sam Vicini, well-known content provider for The Athletic, actually one of the top, considered one of the top analysts for the NBA draft and the NBA. And so when you're talking about Calipari and developing players and getting them to the next level better than anybody's done it, you get all kinds of opinions from all all corners of the basketball world, if you want to put it that way. So I thought that was interesting. Some of it I responded to. It's just so hard to, really give an opinion in a few characters in a tweet without it turning into something that you really can't communicate very well that way. So I'll try to do it here today a little bit, explain some of that and give my part in it and talk about that. But something broke just before I came on, something that I asked Calipari about on Monday in a brief two-man media scrum at the end of that presentation in Hot Springs. I started bringing up the exhibition schedule because I've already talked about the full 31 game slate that, even though the university hasn't officially put it out, I've gone through and did it on here last week. Went through everything. I'm your first like. All right. Is that Greg Parker? Wow. All right, Greg, I appreciate that. I don't know. I have nothing. I have no parting gift for you on that one, but thanks. But I'll say that I asked Calipari about the Kansas exhibition game. When are we going to hear about that? And he said, I'm probably going to drop something soon on that. Well, 2 days later, Arkansas has now put out the fact that, man, I forgot to silence this thing. You're going to hear chimes. Yeah, absent-minded professor. I do this all the time. I don't quite have my full game together. Love you too, Parker. Yeah, I've known this guy forever, Greg Parker. Oh, well, way back. Anyway, I asked Calipari about the Kansas game. It comes out today. Arkansas is going to host Kansas. We knew that at Bud Walton Arena. Now we know the date, October 25th. It's a Friday. It's a charity exhibition game. It is a weekend. Remember, we were talking in our recruiting segment last week. I was starting to speculate, could they use some of these exhibition games to bring in visitors? We know the football weekends that some visitors are coming in on. Will they try to schedule this game either in that off date for football, like they did Purdue last year, played on an off date right in the middle of football season? The football team was off that weekend, a bye week. Would they do that in the middle of October? No, they're playing October 25th. It's a Friday night. Arkansas's football team will be on the road, Mississippi State, a day later, playing a football game, the following day. So you're not competing for television eyes or, the fans that might want to travel to Mississippi State. In theory, I don't know that any of us know what time that game will be. That would be a tough juggle, I guess, if you're playing a game in Bud Walton Arena in Fayetteville Friday night, but it's doable. But either way, you're not competing with two big, games on your campus that weekend. And Arkansas will have the campus to itself in terms of that for the big basketball matchup against Bill Self in Kansas. It's about 12 days before the first regular season game against Lipscomb on November 6th. I think that's noteworthy. And I'm assuming now, if this is games played October 25th, maybe the road game or the Dallas area game against TCU. Remember, TCU's home and its campus is actually in Fort Worth. So when Calipari, and he mentioned Dallas again against TCU, I guess they could play at a neutral site there in Dallas, play somewhere off TCU's campus. It's effectively a home game for TCU. Arkansas has fans in that area, and it's easy to get to. So maybe some Arkansas fans will go to an exhibition game against a high major school, another Big 12 school. I find this very interesting because you get TCU. Probably now, I'm guessing, so we don't know that date yet, but now that we know the Kansas date toward the end of October there, my guess is probably speculating TCU a little before that. I mentioned the home opener 12 days after that Kansas game against Lipscomb on November 6th. And then basically 2 weeks, 15 days from Kansas and Bud Walton Arena to Baylor and Dallas in the regular season, the second game of your regular season after Lipscomb a few days before that, you will have played 3 Big 12 teams, 2 that don't count. And it's a strong conference. I say it all the time. I think it's the best conference top to bottom consistently in college basketball. Obviously, there's been some shuffling, Texas and OU to the SEC, but they brought in Arizona and Arizona State. Even BYU under Mark Pope, and they're throwing around NIL money like it's like they're playing Monopoly, and they can just grab it and hand it out. The Big 12 is going to continue to be arguably the top conference in basketball. Joe Lenardi, we've talked about this a couple of times, and I think a couple of weeks ago put out one of his early, obviously, projections for the NCAA tournament bracketology. He had 10 teams from the Big 12 and 10 from the SEC in his projections. Those 2 teams were tied in terms of which leagues are going to put the most in. All this stuff will play out. There could be anywhere from 9 to 11 NCAA tournament teams in the SEC when the dust settles and all the smoke clears on it. Who's our first big challenge, in my opinion? Well, that's a good question, Greg Parker. Thanks for being on here. I mean, games that count, it's Baylor. Games that count, it's going to be Baylor. But again, Kansas will be a challenge, and we know Purdue was. That game went to overtime. It looked like an Arkansas team that had preseason rankings of top 15-ish, top 16, off the strength of that performance against Purdue team that was projected to be a national title contender and win the Big Ten again. Well, that's what happened. Big Ten, and they got all the way to the title game and lost to UConn, which doesn't seem to lose anymore in March. So that's how that played out. And you thought that Arkansas team. So that was a challenge. How much value was in it? It didn't improve your net or your rankings because it's not a regular season game. And the idea was, well, Arkansas got better playing it. Last season was a disaster. I don't think you could point to even the win over Duke at home. And that was a big win. If you're looking at the resume, that was Arkansas's biggest win on paper, typically a top 10 rated team all season. Swept Texas A&M, one of the league favorites going in, who bumped along and barely broke 500 in league play, but did win a game in the NCAA tournament. So it's hard to, we could forecast. I did the rankings of this schedule. It's one of the segments I did last week. I actually ranked the top 20 games of the 31 game schedule, and I went through all 31 games. But from a distance, certain games look like they're going to be tough or have more impact, and some of them seem obvious. But not knowing what kind of team you're going to have, when the pitfalls and bumps and bruises of your season are exactly going to hit you, some of these things are to be determined and be played out. And all that's obvious. It's Captain Obvious. But getting into the Kansas game, I do think that will help Arkansas. Each season has its own context. You've got a new coach, a new coaching staff, a lot of new players. You have one returning Razorback, but even he's new to the new coaching staff. The new coaching staff has brought some of the Kentucky feel from a year ago, a team that finished second in the SEC. It amazes me, and people do focus on what you do in March. There's a lot of attention, and your memories are predominantly what you did in March, and other things. Yeah, you give a nod to regular season success, winning your conference or competing for a conference title. Remember, Kentucky finished one game behind Tennessee in the SEC pecking order. Tennessee won the league. Kentucky and 3 other teams finished tied for second at 13-5. And Tennessee was only a game better. So Kentucky continues to have really good regular seasons for the most part. There have been a few outliers in Calipari's 15 years there. One of those a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. But remember, the COVID-ended season, Kentucky won the SEC outright, and there was no NCAA tournament. So that's part of this last 5-year window when you don't see any Kentucky runs in the NCAA tournament. Well, one of those COVID stopped. Kentucky won the league outright. Kentucky's finished, I think, second or third, two more times in the last five years in the league, and one of the top rated teams in the country, but faltered in the NCAA tournament. I'm not saying that doesn't matter, but some of the stuff that was coming out from Big Blue Nation after I put a lot of content from Calipari, things he was talking about at this coaches clinic, about offense, about defense, some of his concepts, had Big Blue Nation, like I said, some of their known media people jumping in there, criticizing Cal. And I think some of that's fair game when you look at postseason results, but some of it I thought they took out of context. And one example, I'm just going to jump into this now. Calipari was talking about how the guys he gets to the NBA, he has a very high percentage. Not only has he got more players in the league than anybody, but he has a high percentage of those are guys on max contracts. And you don't get max contracts unless you're in the top echelon of the players in the NBA. That's how those salary structures and those contract structures work. And his point was top players can play in the mid game. The new, where the game has trended and the analytics have shown, three has always been greater than two. When you talk about the 3-point shot, 3 points is more than two. And for the longest time, even with the 3-point line, the game was played mostly inside the arc. Three was a novelty. It got more and more important. And now it's a mainstream part of the game. And there's, analytics suggest that a heavier diet of threes with the right people taking them and a system that figures out how to space the floor, get gravity, and then get guys driving lanes to get to the basket. What happens? You get a closer range shot when you drive. You get all the way to the basket. It's a higher percentage shot. And if a defense badly enough wants to prevent you from doing that, they probably have to foul you, and then you're getting free throws out of it. So the analytics make sense in terms of the way the game's played now. And some of these high-level analytics people will say, we've never ruled out mid-range shooting. They say things like that. Sam Vecini came on when I put the tweet out that I agree with Calipari that he wants to make sure his guys are strong in the mid-range. They work on that stuff too. It's part of what they do in their dribble drive offense. And he sees that as still an integral part of the game. I actually agree with that. And it's not to say that means that the entire thinking in analytics that threes and at the basket scoring or shot attempts should not be driving the game the way it's played now. But the college game and the NBA game are still very different. The NBA has more of an emphasis on that. There is an emphasis to some level in college, not as much. Mid-range and post-play means more in the college game than it does the NBA game. But I think you can get guys ready to have a middle game because the best players in the NBA have that. They dominate because they have that, not because they have a lack of it. Even Steph Curry, the greatest perimeter shooter of all time, has a killer mid-range game. Now he plays outside in. All of his work inside the arc is set up by his threat from three. But he's a three. You talk about a three-level scorer. He's one of the best finishers at the rim for a guy that plays below the rim. His skill and crap. But the point is, if you looked at the top 11 scorers in the NBA alone last year, 4 of those guys were Cal guys. Almost half. Not half, but getting there. Top 11 guys. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who to me is the poster boy for the mid-range game and why it works. I mean, his team won the Western Conference last year. He was a finalist for the MVP, one of 3 players in the running for that. I think he got the second, he may have got the third most votes. I don't remember, but he was up there with Luka and the Joker who won it again. But you have Tyrese Maxey in that group, Devin Booker, and Darren Fox, who's with the Sacramento Kings. But most of those guys, their skill sets, to me, rely heavily on mid-range work, and everything else fills in around that. I would say every one of those guys, all 4 of them, their game starts in the middle and then the other stuff fills in around it. There's no doubt when you go from the college game to the NBA game that your perimeter game must get better if that's not already the sharpest tool in your tool belt. If that's not your sharpest thing, it's got to get better. It typically does for guys that reach these levels of production and star value, and you get those max contracts. No one's denying that. But it's also, I don't think, wrong of Calipari to say, hey, these analytics, you see more and more coaches. I hear coaches all the time poo-poo, we need to eliminate these mid-range shots. Well, it makes sense if the personnel can't knock them down. but as just a general rule. And when Sam Vecini said, hey, yeah, guess what? Calipari's basically talking about stuff that he understands it, but doesn't, because no analytics are really saying, abolish mid-range game. And then he had several supporting tweets after that, after he responded to my tweet, going through Tyrese Maxey's stats, showing how he went from how he very much increased his volume of work with three-point shooting off the bounce. And his two numbers in the NBA in terms of attempts and volume have gone down while threes have gone up. But he didn't use SGA as an example, another Calipari guy, where it's the opposite. SGA remains elite in a mid-range game. But the other thing he followed up with, he said nobody's saying that mid-range work isn't useful, but as an essential counter, not the main thing. I disagree with that. Again, the majority of the top 11 scorers in the NBA just last season, most of those guys, the mid-range is a staple of what they do, not a counter. Not that they're using mid-range off of being run off the three-point line, and that was their strength, and now they're building around it. It's the opposite, in my opinion, for most guys still. Even in this NBA, where the spacing's better, the three-point shooting's a lot more a part of the game, and you can argue that because of that spacing and having the right pieces most teams have from the perimeter, that it helps some of these guys get cleaner driving angles in the mid-range. There's no doubt that three-point shooting helps expedite that, but it doesn't mean as individual development, which is what the tweet talked about, and it talked about Calipari's 30 max contract guys. So those are elite level guys, and typically they have a strong mid-range game at various levels, but they haven't they don't go to the NBA and all of a sudden now, at least half or more of most of these guys' work is from behind the three-point line in terms of their volume of shots and the kind of shots they get. All right, so I spent a lot of time on that. I didn't drill. And one other thing I thought was interesting, some of the folks with Big Blue Nation, yeah, 3 is more points than 2. And if you look at from a percentage standpoint, it always made sense why you would want to fully embrace the three-point line in the game, and not for it to be a novelty or something that that's not really a part of the necessarily built into your game plan. The game evolved to, and I think it's a more fun game now. I love the golden era. I'm old school. A lot of the principles and stuff they do, I don't think these guys do as well, but I think these guys do a lot of stuff that players and styles back then can't do. So, you pick your poison, you decide. And over time, I've realized this makes sense. 3 points is more than 2. If you shoot 50% on twos, let's just use 6 field goal attempts as one example. If you go 3 of 6, you're shooting 50% from the field, from the 2-point range, and you got 6 points. If you shoot 2 of 6 from 3, you get 33% efficiency, but you got the same 6 points. So what we've seen is guys expand their games, get better and better. Even big men across the board, positionless basketball guys are getting more efficient shooting from 3. And so as those efficiency numbers move up, 40% shooting from 3 in volume is better than 50% shooting from 2, or somewhere above 33%. That becomes obvious. You can't just live on that the whole time, but it's why you need to expand it. All right, we're not going to spend a whole lot more time because I've done a lot of that. I wanted to get into some of the stuff that I thought was a little bit juicy, but some of the talking heads at Big Blue Nation, when they saw that tweet, the guys that cover Cal, some of the fans, they jumped all over it. They're like, yeah, this is why. Good luck with him, guys. This is exactly part of the problem. But again, Kentucky has been one of the strongest teams consistently in the SEC and in the country, except for March Madness. They have a point there. But I don't think his philosophy about being strong in the mid-range necessarily plays into that. In fact, last year, and this may be an outlier, Tim Welch joined that team. The offense was elite. The defense, again, Calipari's defenses have not been all that great the last several years. Last year was much worse than some of the previous ones defensively, but offensively, not only they play fast at a pace that we've seen Calipari's offenses do at times, but they were really efficient from 3, and their volume was up there. We know Alabama under Nate Oates, that's what they laser focused on, is 3-point shooting is a big part of what they do, and then rim running. So it's that concept again of space on the floor, getting up threes and volumes, finding guys who can be efficient at that, and then getting all the way to the rim and get out in transition. Well, Kentucky was great in transition. They were great in half court. But one of the things that were great in was they were elite was in 3-point shooting last year. Their volume of makes, total and per game, second only to Alabama. and their efficiency led the SEC, one of the best in the country, at nearly 41%. They didn't shoot the ball well against Oakland, in the NCAA tournament. And Oakland had a guy that went nuts. I mean, those things happen. Calipari has one NCAA tournament win in the last 5 years. One of those seasons, COVID shut it down. Kentucky was the SEC champ. They have been strong in regular season, though. So it's not like what he does doesn't work. I think he's identified a problem for postseason in terms of the average age of his guys. I mean, that's probably a big part of it. I don't think your problems when you basically won one NCAA tournament game in your last 3 tournament appearances with 2 first round major upsets. I don't think you can just point to that one thing and say that is all of it. And some of these other things there may be some validity to them. However, again, it was a talking point. Cal talked about a lot. Let's move off of that. We're 21 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I guess I ran it a little bit, but I have my own opinions on some of these things. Agree to disagree. I love the comments. So I guess, is this a Kentucky fan? I'm not sure, but they're saying Kentucky had the personnel last year to be good at that. Well, then kudos to Calipari for utilizing that. They're better than Arkansas's 3-point shooters this year. Well, maybe. We need to see. We'll see. I mean, Nelly Davis, NCAA March Madness, Andy Katz, who's been around forever, used to be with ESPN. He's their lead guy, for that outlet, put out his top 20 3-point shooters that he thinks will be incoming this season. And I think Nelly Davis was 7th. Top 10 or top 20. I don't remember the full list, but it was how many it was. But I think Nelly came in at 7. They also put out their list of top wings. They listed Nelly Davis at 6'4" as a wing. Okay. The case can be made for that. He was 7th in their list of top incoming wings for the season. Then they put out a day or so later, 2 days later, a list of the top playmaking guards and guards. And you didn't see, you did not see any Arkansas players on there. No DJ Wagner, no Boogie Fland, but there was no Nelly Davis. And some Arkansas fans were like, "Why is Nelly not on here?" And I'm like, "Well, 2 days ago they said he was a wing. He made that list. He wasn't omitted. He wasn't forgotten. We can disagree whether you call him a wing or a guard, but and then Nelly's one of those guys that's going to get a lot of different. He's going to get a lot of different much more preseason love as we move along and get closer this season when all the preseason teams are released, some of these national awards and watch lists. He's going to be on them. Some of these comments, I try to read them and get them out, but I'm not getting to them fast enough. All right, so some of the things Cal talked about, he mentioned defense. He said when he was a young coach, a really young coach at UMass, I guess before he was even the head coach, or when he was, transitioning, he was talking about how he had 25 keys. And they were all well thought out, and it was a great idea in terms of each one. If you looked at them, in a vacuum, but if you put them all together, it was just too much for young players, and would still probably be today, even for a lot of pros, to have that many. And he was advised to maybe drill those down to a handful of things, 4 or 5 things. But one of the things he said of coaching veteran Rick Barnes, we know, used to coach back east, and he was Texas's coach. And now, of course, Rick Barnes has had having a lot of success at Tennessee, including that SEC title last year in Elite 8 run. But he said years ago, Rick Barnes told him to stick to these 4 things on defense. Pressure the ball, make sure that you've got adequate gap help. On the weak side, when the ball's on one side of the floor, bring your defender, any defenders you have on that side, as close as you can, or move them as far away as you can as the man they're defending, because that just brings help and shows help for the paint, clogs that up. So that was one of the principles. And then the 4th one is just decide how you want to defend the post. Well, there's more than one way to do that. You can use multiple players, you can hedge guys, you can back a guy, you can front a guy, you can get a guy on your side. And so those were the 4 things. I thought that was interesting. The game changes, things change. And so you have to make tweaks. You have to sometimes throw it out and bring in something new. Calipari talked about all that. He said he get stuff, he'll learn stuff from high school coaches when he goes and watches their practice or games. and then have a phone call with him after that to discuss that and how he might want to use it. He takes things that he sees and he says that he puts that into the things he's already doing and just makes little adjustments and tweaks. And he says sometimes they're things that work for the person he has, sometimes they're not, and he tries it a couple of times, 3 times, and then he moves on to something else. Or he'll find something new, try it, and maybe it's not exactly working right, so he'll add a new little wrinkle to what he just learned from somebody and then try that. So that should be like anything else. It's like a chef in the kitchen. You try different things, different ingredients. Sometimes you just dabble a little bit. And a guy that's been doing it as long time as he has, with the success that he has, these high school coaches are locked in, man. They're taking notes. Some of the best coaches in the state. I was sitting right next to Wes Swift, who's part of that ARBC leadership that brings these coaches in. Wes Swift's one of the top, not only high school coaches in the state, one of the best high school coaches in the country at Jonesboro, Titletown now. But he's taking notes like it's his first day of class. I mean, this is why you like to be in these environments, especially if you're a basketball junkie. What else did Calipari talk about? He really continues to talk. By the way, he was showing clips from practice. I tweeted from my camera on my phone to the big screen, so it wasn't great. It wasn't great footage, other than you got to see stuff you hadn't seen already from practice, because he was breaking down stuff and showing these coaches things they were working on. Some of it was pretty good, and most of it was very informative. But he continues to talk about, he says it in other public settings and press conferences, Arkansas playing fast and learning how to play fast. And so I always said, when he was hired, before we ever started hearing us talk to this fan base and really dialed in everything he says, I always said his best teams were teams that were excelled in transition, playing, especially at end of games, not exactly like how Nolan Richardson would do it, but at the same time, those teams, sometimes the difference in games was how they could get out and run and get easy scores and just win the track meets and these opportunities in games to separate themselves. And I always thought his teams were great at that. And typically his best teams were just brutal on the glass, offensive and defensive. They'd separate themselves there. But transition was one of those. Well, he keeps talking about transition, how important it is. And I had one of these segments before where a source that close to it's telling me, look, first and secondary transition are going to be probably their biggest focal points on how they want to score. Of course, they're going to have offense, half-court offense. It's a dribble drive, motion offense, and play off of that. So a lot of the Kentucky fans, when you don't have the success you want, and you're at a blue blood like Kentucky, where you think you're the top basketball program of all time, and arguably probably are, a lot of titles, a lot of success, as much success Calipari had in recruiting and results in the NCAA tournament these last 5 years, despite how good they've mostly been in the regular season, the postseason, makes things glaring. It makes things glaring, and then you start to say, okay, some of the stuff they do may be antiquated. Well, we're going to find out how Calipari does things, what adjustments he makes, other than tightening down to an 8 or 9. He's no longer filling out the bench with guys that are expecting to play. It's 8 or 9 guys, 9 guys at Arkansas this year. It's not a roster that is dominated at least half by freshman players in that top 9 rotation. There's only 3, a third, so not half or more, which is one of the things that kind of defined how he built rosters in the past. So he's making adjustments. To me, if you think some of those things he was doing before is antiquated in today's game, where the transfer portal means so much now, and a lot of these mid-majors you play early in the league, in the tournament, are loaded with veteran guys that have been around a while, he's responding to that. We'll see if it works. We'll see if he's able to do that. So we'll see. But to me, I don't see him being completely stagnant or standing pat just based on some of those things. The mid-range work, you can argue that, they cling too much to it. But again, he went with what the personnel offered him last year and had the best three-point shooting team in the league. When you look at efficiency, the volume was second only to Alabama. So you could argue one of those two teams was the best three-point team in the conference and among the best in the country. Of course, Alabama made it to a Final Four, first in school history. One of the other nuggets that I thought was interesting, that was one of the obvious things, is Tyler Ulis was with Cal in Hot Springs. Former star player on that undefeated team, with speaking to Devin Booker and Willie Cauley-Stein and Carl Anthony Towns, Trey Lyles. That team was loaded, man. Remember Bobby Portis? Arkansas finished second to Kentucky. Kentucky went undefeated. I think Arkansas went 13-5, finished second in the SEC. Portis was SEC Player of the Year, despite all of those future stars in the NBA. And Portis was second team All-American that year. But Tyler Eulis was a big part of that. Tyler's been a student assistant at Kentucky the past 2 seasons, working on academics to get to a point where he can move up as a full-time assistant. We've been talking a while. Calipari had talked for a while. That's the guy. But Arkansas this whole time has only had 4 named assistant coaches while they waited on Tyler. Tyler coached the tournament, the tournament team, La Familia. I think that was the name of it, this summer. That went late in the summer. But he's officially on board. That news broke. I broke it. Asked Calipari about it after that presentation as well to say, is this official now? But Eulis was wearing Razorback gear. He was doing some mini drill stuff in front of the coaches. It was, they weren't really doing much. They had a basketball and bounced it back and forth to each other. But I talked to Tyler Eulis after it. He's glad to be here, but he's officially the 5th assistant on Arkansas staff. So, you've got 2 associate head coaches as part of that 5-man staff. Kenny Payne, 2 years as Louisville's head coach. Long time with Calipari, did a great job of developing big men in Cal's Kentucky system. He's an associate head coach, as is Chin Coleman, associate head coach under Cal. Chuck Martin, one of the assistant coaches who came over from Kentucky with Cal. Brad Calipari with his dad now as an assistant coach at Arkansas. And Tyler Eulis now as an assistant coach at Arkansas. Don't forget, earn, not given. Okay, we got some 32 minutes in. We haven't even gotten to recruiting yet. But we did. We went through some stuff that I think is important. The other thing, again, Calipari mentioned in terms of schedule, at some point I got to think Arkansas is going to just drop everything at once. Just put it all out. Here's the exhibition game date against Kansas. Now we know it today because they did drop that out. But along with TCU and the intra-squad scrimmages, red-white games, as we like to call them, have been played in Fayetteville on the home campus. Usually Bud Walton Arena, and then Eric Patrick Melsman wanted to do something different. The novelty of opening Old Barnhill back up, I thought that was cool. Covered every one of them in there that they had. They didn't have one the COVID year. Good turnout for that. But back in the day, back under Nolan, man, I go all the way back to Eddie. I go all the way back to Eddie and the triplets and the Final Four. And back in the day, but especially under Nolan toward the end, Arkansas would play some red-white games. They had more than one, and they'd play them in Little Rock, Pine Bluff. They'd move them, they'd have them in multiple places, and in Fayetteville. They used to have Midnight Madness, those things too, but they stopped doing that. Well, Calipari told me again, he mentioned this before, but I asked him about it again, because we still haven't seen an official schedule from the U of A, and we haven't seen any dates in the exhibition season until we got Kansas today. About are they still going to play out off campus? And he said, yeah, still going to play one here in Hot Springs. Is it? I can't remember, but the high school finals are all played in Hot Springs, and that venue seats about 5,000 or 6,000. So that'll be perfect. That'll be perfect to have one there. They're also going to play in Pine Bluff. Well, we know the convention center hosted Arkansas Razorback red-white games and regular season games in the past, including the big win over Michael Jordan, undefeated North Carolina in mid-February of 1984. I mean, you had a ton of future Olympic gold medalists for Team USA on that game. 4. That's a lot in one college game in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. But you had the GOAT, Michael Jordan. You had a lot of other NBA guys on North Carolina's team, a few on Arkansas's team. Look at Alvin Robertson and Joe Klein. But we know Pine Bluff has been the site, the convention center, as old as it is. The King Cotton Classic's back in there. Another venue, that I think the convention center holds, I'll probably say this wrong, around 6,000 to 7,000. It's probably about right. So that's a perfect environment again for a red-white game. So we'll see what Arkansas does with that in terms of when they'll play those games. I guess we got a Kentucky guy in here that's lighting up I don't know, but some of the comments here. Yeah, so let's get into recruiting. Let's do that. We went through most of the Cal stuff in Hot Springs that was worth talking about. There's probably some stuff I left out, and if I think about it, I will mention this. I did say Nellie Davis appeared on a couple of lists from Andy Katz, one of the top wings in the country coming in, one of the top 3-point shooters in the country coming in. But today, John Rothstein released his top 25 impact freshmen for the upcoming season. And both, you expect this, both Boogie Flan and Carter Knox made that list. And that's expected. They were top 25 rated 5-star players, both McDonald's All-Americans in the class of 2024. So no surprise there, but it's good to see him on the list. I tweeted that out this morning. And so let's now get into recruiting. I do have some intel and some nuggets for you. And let's go to Coapete. The last time I was on was Thursday of last week. I mentioned the trilogy. Tuesday was going through the schedule, top 20 games that I ranked. The next day, I did my SEC power rankings 1 through 16. Arkansas was third in that, by the way. I think I had Kentucky, since we got big BBN folks on here today, tied for 8th or something like that. Tied for 8th with Ole Miss. Well, we'll see how it plays out. They might do better than that. Arkansas may do worse, or both teams might be better, or both teams might be worse. And then Thursday, I went through recruiting stuff, and I said I had one source telling me it was real quiet about the Coapete visit that was expected, top 5 nationally, 5-star, top 5 ranked nationally in that 2025 class. 6'7", 6'8" combo forward out of Gilbert, Arizona, was set to visit Arkansas. He just visited Arizona State. Arkansas was playing for this past weekend when the football team had a game against Alabama, Birmingham. And when I was on Thursday, I said, I have one source that's telling me this visit's not going to happen. It's going to reschedule it. It's postponing it. It's not going to happen. Well, I've had nobody, well, that same source has come back and said he wasn't there. But I've seen no photographic evidence that there was a stealth visit. At this point in time, you wouldn't have a stealth visit. If these things are announced, you want photos out there, you want the whole thing. And then John Calipari spent some of the weekend down in Florida with Dick Vitale, assuming he wasn't holding on to content and photos from days before that. He spent some of the weekend down in Florida checking on Dick Vitale. Has been in a fight with his own fight with cancer. And so we saw that stuff splash on social media. So if you've got a high-profile 5-star player on campus for a weekend official visit, I doubt your head coach is going to be jaunting around to other places. Not saying it's never happened before, but you just kind of put it all together. I've seen nowhere where Coapete was on campus this weekend. All right, so you go back to early May, when Darius Acuff Jr., the 5-star Arkansas commit, top 5 rated player, one of the top guys in the country. I had an NBA scout tell me recently he was at the Nike Skills Academy, I think 6 weeks ago or whatever, however long it's been. And Acuff, that they bring out college players, some young college players, some of the top high school guys. And then Acuff, one of the NBA scouts, told me, look, man, the way he played, he helped himself in the eyes of NBA scouts, and he's on a path. He said he's on a path to being a potential lottery pick in a one-and-done scenario at Arkansas. All right, so we'll see how that plays out, but he did well. But Acuff's committed to Arkansas. The only top 10 rated 5-star, by the way, that's committed to any school right now is Darius Acuff Jr. But he visited Arkansas in early May, the same weekend DJ Wagner was on his visit, and privately committed to Cal. 2 weeks later, publicly it came out. But that's how long it's been since Arkansas had a high school visitor in. And so people that are pointing to, I see a lot of fans with other teams, especially Kentucky, pointing to, where's Arkansas's visitors? Remember, Arkansas has only one home game in September for football, where you try to get these players in on visits when there's something going on campus, at least a sporting event this time of year, football, where you got a huge turnout with your fan base and they can see that atmosphere. They can attend basketball practice, so you're trying to showcase as much as you can. You try to make the most of that. But Arkansas has only one home September game. It was against Alabama, Birmingham. So I'm not saying that's why Coapete's not brought in. I don't know that he's going to reschedule it. I'm hearing different things on that in terms of will he. He's also rescheduled his Duke visit, although he's announced a date for that. He's pushed that out. Heard nothing on Arkansas. Radio silence on that. I know Calipari went out to see him when the recruiting period opened up a few weeks, going on 2 weeks now. I think it was 2 weeks ago to the day, actually. So it's been a couple of weeks, September 4th. So we'll see. We'll see on that. And so unless there was something sneaky on that I missed, Arkansas still doesn't have a high school visitor. Isaiah Seeley, they've been trying to get him in just because he's up the road in Springdale. Top 50 player that Calipari's offered in state. He told me he still hasn't been on campus yet. He just wrapped up a visit to St. Louis. But I will tell you this, Arkansas's got multiple visits planned, including a September one this weekend, the 20th through the 22nd. Mika Murinen, class of 2026, 6'11" forward, stretch four from Finland, who plays at Arizona Compass Prep, was at Sunrise Christian, MVP for Brad Bill Elite on the Nike E16 Peach Jam, the 16 and under version of it. It was nationally televised. JJ Andrews, the local kid, his teammate on that Brad Bill team, both of those guys had great stretches there at the end of the run there in Peach Jam. But Murinen got MVP of the title game, and he's been a fast chart riser, man. He's now ranked top 5 by several services in the country in the 2026 class. What's key about him, and I've told you guys this at least once before, maybe twice on these segments in the last couple of weeks, that Murinen is considered to be a quote-unquote strong candidate to reclass. Well, if he reclasses, that means 2025, and he's basically in the same bucket as these other players we're talking about in terms of the urgency, because your early period's in November. It's coming up. That's why these visits, you're seeing a lot of players crisscrossing the country each weekend taking visits. Well, Murinen has got Arkansas among 4 visits. And so we'll see. I mean, does he make it to campus this weekend? Arkansas is on the road in football playing Auburn, so you're not going to have that, but you will have basketball practice, and it may be, for whatever scheduling reasons, it maybe makes the most sense that he comes in at this time, but that's part of his trajectory in terms of other schools he's visiting as well. Arkansas set for this weekend. So Murinen very well could be the first visitor that Arkansas has had since May and since Darius Acuff Jr. And as many names as we've talked about that are already obviously in the 2025 class, that probably wouldn't be a prop bet that many people would have taken, other than trying to, if it landed that way, you made more money on it, because it wouldn't be the house odds wouldn't have favored it. So, but that's it. He's scheduled to come in. I love this guy's game. At 17 years old, he's on the Finland national team. We know that happens overseas. Some of these younger guys are some of the best players in the world already. He looks the part, man. He's a really good player. I like his ceiling is as high as most guys in the next 3 classes, 25, 26, and 27. Really good player. All right, so Arkansas's got that. Malik Thomas, who I still have a source that tells me when all these visits, the dust settles on him, Arkansas is going to get him. Got one guy that says that. I've got some other folks I talked to, not so sure. They think, but UConn's still in the picture with a Caden Lewis. We've talked about that dynamic with him, and Alabama now losing on Jasper Johnson in the mix for guards. There's Braylon Mullins out there. Some of the same teams going after certain guards, but Arkansas with Acuff on board is really focused on Malik Thomas and another name I'm going to talk about in a second when I get down the calendar a little bit on visits. But Malik Thomas was also supposed to visit Arkansas this weekend, and didn't, originally. And we've known before the weekend came, I think it was last week, that I've been saying for a couple of weeks, that looked at that first October home game against Tennessee. That game's on the 5th, so the weekend of the October 4th through 6th, keep an eye on that. It's going to he either keeps this mid-September or it's going to move to that. So I talked about that and wrote about it, and sure enough, we confirmed that he did. And so we knew that news prior to the actual weekend that we just had in the first Fayetteville home game against UAB. So the only talking point here is that's fast approaching now. And what happened was, when he was originally planning to come to Arkansas mid-September, Malik Thomas had 2 weeks after that, late September, not this coming weekend, but the following one, a visit set up to Alabama. Now he's got Arkansas on the other side of Alabama. What does that mean? May mean nothing, other than that's just how it's going to play out. But I can tell you one thing, that Tennessee game, the atmosphere will be even grander for that football game than it was for UAB. So it may be in Arkansas's benefit to have it after Alabama, and to have even a bigger matchup on campus for football. Who knows what matters? NIL is going to be king. I know Malik Thomas told me he loves Calipari. He told me that back in May. Really was into Cal in terms of being his kind of guy. And I told you guys from the get-go, he's arguably my favorite player in the country, not because I think he's the best player necessarily. He's certainly got a case for it, but because of his swagger and just the way he carries himself, and then the things he can do on the basketball court. I roll it all together. I like the smile. I like all the things about it. He's the kind of guy that I think helps your brand. Calipari doesn't need any help, but he's just kind of that guy to me. So either way, 6'4" guard out of the Pittsburgh area. He's an overtime elite in Atlanta. Malik Thomas, we've talked about it. Top 6, top 5, depending on who you look at. Rated 5-star. I mean, when you're that highly ranked, you have a case that, hey, I'm the best dude in the land. He certainly believes in himself that way. But he's another guy where people thought it was going to be UConn. We've gone through all this. He originally postponed a visit to Arkansas in late June. Then he's moved this one. If this guy makes it on campus, I feel like if he gets on campus, I feel like Arkansas will have the edge in locking this up. So I'll say that much. I know I've got folks that aren't so sure. I've got one guy that says it's going to happen. If Calipari gets him on campus and they go through their whole presentation with him on campus, I'm going to give the edge to Arkansas there. So I don't know if that's intel. I do have some intel on some stuff. Arkansas, Chris Sinak Jr., the third player at one point that was looking at that September 13, 15 weekend to come to Arkansas, actually put out that was what it was going to be. Backed off of that. It was never out publicly. He put out 4 public visits. Arkansas wasn't on it. We thought maybe he, since he put him out in a clump, that was it. And then shortly after that, he announced a visit. A visit announcement came out that I was able to confirm October 18th through the 20th. So we just said Malik Thomas the 4th through the 6th. Arkansas has a bye week in football the following weekend. That might be a place to put the red-white game if you're going to have one in Fayetteville. Calipari talked about playing in Pine Bluff and Hot Springs. I'll be surprised if he doesn't have one in Fayetteville. But maybe he doesn't. Maybe he does it a different way because they've got that big exhibition game. But to me, maybe you land a red-white game there. But either way, you've got an off week. And then the following week in Arkansas is back home after that bye week in football against LSU. And so they've got multiple visitors set up. Chris Sinak Jr. is one of them. 6'10", 6'11" forward center. I talked to his AAU director at length about his situation in Arkansas. I've told you guys LSU is probably the front runner there. Schools like Kentucky feel good about where they sit with it. There's about 7 teams on his final 12 list. We'll see who all actually gets visits. I don't know that it's 100% done LSU. I do know LSU, for the visits that he's put out on his schedule, LSU that I know of has the last visit on November 9th. Then the early signing period begins a few days later. So we'll see. But I talked to his AAU director, and he's like, look, Cal's been heavily involved. Arkansas was out to see him at Link Academy in Branson, just up this road from Fayetteville. Calipari and associate head coach Chen Coleman were out to see him yesterday. I tweeted that out. I put that information out. Arkansas is going to get a shot. They're impressed with Cal's track record. Who isn't? We'll see if Calipari, once they get him on campus, and if that visit holds up, how that plays out. But his AAU director for the team he competes with in the spring and summer on that Pro 16, that rising circuit, Pro 16 next, and it's Puma's the shoe endorser there. We'll see what goes on there. But he says that they do really like Cal. They like Arkansas staff. They like the situation at Arkansas. That's about as far as I got on that. I guess really, the intel on that I was given before was he really wanted to visit Arkansas. If he really wants to visit Arkansas, I don't still know how much of that is really just about Calipari. But he had 7 teams in the SEC on his list. And so that may have something to do with it. I mean, he's a guy that's originally from that Baton Rouge, New Orleans area. And so he probably grew up paying attention to the SEC, and Arkansas has had its strong seasons, especially under Eric Patrick Musselman, the previous coach. So maybe there's some stuff for Arkansas. I guess I'm having a hard time articulating this. Maybe there was some built-in intrigue in Arkansas before Cal, and then maybe Cal's the kind of guy that can wow him and close the deal. I was trying to get all the way there to say I'm not 100% convinced it's LSU, but I still think that's a heavy lean there for whatever reasons. And maybe Kentucky's in better shape than I'm even giving them credit for, but Arkansas's got a chance here, especially with Calipari. Almost 50 minutes in, let's get through this because we know J.J. Andrews, the local product, class of 2026, ESPN still has him ranked the 15th best player in the country, a 5-star, Little Rock Christian Academy, part of that Brad Bill Elite Nike. The first time a BBE program ever won Peach Jam, and J.J. Andrews has his stamp all over it. 6'7", strong, athletic, plays the right way, blue collar 5-star. I say that all the time. Just an animal on the glass, and plays the right way though. He's not just blue collar. He's always. I mean, since like he was 14 years old, I noticed he has a very mature approach to the game in terms of being a good teammate, playing the right way, not making it all about him. And he's one of those guys that'll do just about anything to win. You know, Jalen Williams played like that for Arkansas at the 5 spot. Different, not the same kind of guy, but that mind is similar in how they look at the game. They're like, man, I'm going to win. There are so many things I can do to win every play, and I understand the more plays I help my team win, that leads to winning games, and then it snowballs from there. And it puts a good light on me. So he's one of those guys. He's visiting that weekend. He's now added a 5th visit. We knew that he first put out a list of 3. It was Missouri, which he already visited last weekend, Dennis Gates in Missouri, LSU, which is scheduled after Arkansas, and that one's actually, I think, in November. And then he added North Carolina State into the list, and now he's added Marquette. He just tweeted that out a couple of days ago. So he's also going to visit Marquette, but I think that's after the first of the year. So during basketball season, guess is he's going to a basketball game. Marquette's one of the top teams in the country, or was last year, and it typically can be, and plays in the Big East, which is another really good basketball, high major conference. We know that. All right, so J.J. Andrews coming in on that October 18th to 20th. So now you've got 2 visitors, him and Sinak, except then when we were on Thursday, while we were live, it got out that Kingston Fleming, someone we've talked about, a top 20 rated lead guard, 5-star in that 2025 class out of San Antonio, 6'3", was going to visit, had set up a visit to Arkansas for that same weekend, October 18th to the 20th. Now you've got 3 visitors. So that, to me, I started to wonder then, okay, you got 3 on that weekend. Koa Pete's either postponing or maybe he never resets it. But are they going to maybe try to put that Kansas game sometime on that weekend? But then you're competing with the football game at home, but you got 3 visitors there. Well, that, as it turns out, no. Arkansas is playing again. Kansas on the 25th. So that's been answered for me. But when Kingston Flemings was on board for that weekend, I'm like, wow, they've got 3 visitors coming in. That's a big weekend. So I think this is interesting. One thing I have not tweeted out, I'll probably do it later, a little bit of intel I'll give you here, is it's not that big of a deal other than it's not been out there. Calipari and an assistant coach at Arkansas, Chuck Martin, were out to see Kingston Flemings last week. So it was either, and I don't remember, it was midweek. It was either the day that he put out that he was coming to visit Arkansas or the day before. I'm not sure. It was mid-ish week last week. I haven't put that out there. I haven't tweeted it. I probably will later, but that's something that you didn't know. But it makes sense. I mean, the recruiting period's been open for 2 weeks now. We've seen a litany of players that Arkansas is heavily targeting. And anytime their players are setting up visits to come see you, that means the coaches are out on the road and going to see them. So it's just something to, bear in mind that Arkansas coaches were in to see Kingston Flemings in San Antonio. This guy just competed just a few weeks ago on Team USA Junior National 3x3, 3-on-3. That's a sport now in the Olympics. It's an international sport, obviously. But the Team USA, going all the way to U18, U17, they have 3-on-3 teams that compete in World Cups and FIBA. And so he was one of the starters. I don't know how many players they have I think they have at least carry 4 or 5 total. But he was on Team USA's 3-on-3 team that competed over in Europe just a few weeks ago. And he's got other visits. He had put Arkansas in his top 5. And when I first came on and talked about it, it was kind of out of the blue. And that was several weeks ago. And he hit mostly Texas schools, Arkansas, Gonzaga, and then the rest, Texas Tech, and Houston. But Arkansas was on the list, and I didn't have a lot of traction with where that was going. Then I learned that Chuck Martin, Arkansas assistant coach, had been involved with him in terms of, for a while, really recruiting him and Calipari. And then it became, when I talked about it the next time, I said, hey, Arkansas, I've learned this now. They are not afraid, because it didn't make sense to me with Darius Acuff, a lead guard. But this is how Calipari's always recruited. He is not afraid to go and convince players, look, you're going to play plenty. This will actually help your exposure and your production and your effectiveness, is having another guy that can do some of the things that we'll ask you to do. And he's stacked rosters before with 5-star guys, some that play the same position, and guys that thrived. Just last year at Kentucky, just last year, their 4 best players arguably are guys that took turns playing on the ball. 2 of those guys were lottery picks. So DJ Wagner's one of them. He dealt with injuries. He's at Arkansas this year. But the point is, he was no slouch. I mean, he was a big part of Kentucky's success last year. That was a successful team until it wasn't in that upset in March. So fans tend to lose sight of that. We judge it by March. I get it. But that was a strong season for Kentucky. And you had several guys doing similar things. And Calipari shows not only can we make it work, but it's not going to hurt your value the next level. So Arkansas is not bashful about this Kingston Fleming's recruitment. He's got other visits set up. As far as I know now, this October 18th through 20th date to Arkansas is the last visit of what he's got set up right now. Now, things shuffle and change, but, that's what it is right now. So another player that's been very interesting, I've been talking about him for a while down in Fort Lauderdale, Sean Abayev. I talked about that Under Armour Next Elite 24 All-Star game about 4 or 5 weeks ago that was played up in Brooklyn, and he was the MVP of that game. He had almost a triple-double. Approaching. He had 22 points, 10 assists, and 7 rebounds. And what he did was, at 6'7" and a half, he's pushing 6'8", he played on the ball, and he just picked and shoot. And he could shoot from 3, he could get in the mid-range, he could get all the way to the rim. Strong guy, confident guy. Really good player. For whatever reason, he's still ranked outside the top 25. He's a guy that was further down. He had that performance, has impressed at workouts. He's moved up. Now he's in that 25 to 30 range. I think he's probably about 10 to maybe 12 rungs too low, too far away from. I think he should be a higher rated player than a 5-star. Chuck Martin, I've mentioned this, the assistant coach at Arkansas, has been involved with him for a while. He went out and saw Abayev last week. Martin did. Arkansas, when the recruiting period opened up, Arkansas is out today. Calipari and Chuck Martin are out today. They're going to Fort Lauderdale to see Abayev. He's already taken a lot of visits. I mean, from Syracuse, there's a lot of some SEC schools. He's got a lot of visits. Just visited USC and EPM out in Los Angeles. But he told me, I interviewed him. I tweeted out some of the things he told me. And he said, really, I'm very interested in Arkansas. Coach Martin's been involved with him, was out to see him. He told me that. And he said that he was just waiting for Coach Cal and Coach Martin to kind of progress things where he could set up a visit. Well, that's progressing. They're both out. I tweeted out his quotes. And within the same night, they set it up to go out today. So they're going out today. That's happening today. Sean Abayev is a guy that, when you look at Arkansas's offer to Sealy, another, Sealy's a top 50 rated guy that can play the 1, 2, or 3. Calipari extended an offer to him. They think that he can help Arkansas. But Abayev is a guy in the same size range that can do multiple things. And I'm just mentioning he can play a combo guard and be your primary handler, as can Sealy. But so you see Calipari unafraid to cast that net with top level guys, most of them 5-stars. But I just gave you 2 examples of guys that right now are just outside of that. In Calipari's history, he's not, Reed Shepherd wasn't rated as highly as some of the guys that were ahead of him in the pecking order. And he played off the bench for Kentucky, but here's a guy that was number 3 overall pick. Calipari's track record is so good that he's got all these examples he can show. And that's a very recent example. You want to point to examples of recency of not doing well in the NCAA tournament, but he's got the resume with helping develop guys. And when you get high-level guys, don't sleep on the guys ranked outside the 25 through even 50 that he's going to identify. Some of those guys are going to break through. And you put those guys around other really good players, and it's going to only help them get better day in and day out. So I kind of went on a thing here, but with recruiting, that's where things are right now. I gave you some intel. I don't have any real intel in terms of a prediction for you on what's going to happen. I mean, right now, I've told you guys for a while, even with Caleb Wilson, who I haven't talked about, let's do that, and then we're going to wrap it up. With Caleb Wilson, that's the one guy, so I've got multiple sources that feel like Arkansas was in the lead. and we really got into mid-July when he then hired the clutch agency. And on several of these segments, I told you, I've been talking to people that thought that that might be an issue. I had another one the last time we were on. I said maybe it won't be an issue. The guy just had a big visit at Kentucky, and one of my sources that felt good about Arkansas is now telling me to watch out for Kentucky. And then I saw this swell of Caleb Wilson interacting with other players like a Caden Lewis and talking about Kentucky. I've seen these things before with high-level guys, and they start making you feel like you're being led down a path of that's where they're going to land, and then something else totally happens. There are still people, even after on the heels of this Caleb Wilson visit to Kentucky, that there's at least, I know there are some folks out there that cover this stuff that still think Arkansas is in the lead. I'm not I've said for a while, going back pre-clutch, that if he had to commit at that time, it would be Arkansas. I've moved off of that to Arkansas as the leader. One thing I've always said that when we've talked about whether Arkansas is in the lead or not with him or other guys beyond Darius Acuff, once we got past that happened in late July. Since then, I've said, understand what I'm saying here is not the equivalent of there's a private commitment. I made that clear. I'm saying it again. There's no player to this point that is privately committed to Arkansas. So that means there's still work to do. Calipari is the best in the business. Closing it up, Caleb Wilson, top 5 rated player in the country. That's, every time these rankings update, he's still that 6'9" combo forward. I've said out of Atlanta, at Holy Innocents, Calipari was the first player he saw on Wednesday, September 4th in the morning. First player he saw when the recruiting period opened up. This is not a tiger that Arkansas is letting go of the tail here just because there's some smoke for other places. I've told you guys that he's got a visit scheduled beyond September to Arkansas. I have not heard anything to conflict with that yet. I just can't go into details on it. And we'll see if any of these exhibition games and any of these other things change things. We're seeing players all the time move their visits. Wilson visited Kentucky. Prior to that, he had one scheduled to Alabama. He didn't take it, but now he's rescheduled that, I think, for October 4th through the 6th to Alabama. And that's the weekend Malik Thomas is out at Arkansas. So we'll see how much Alabama's in the mix there. We haven't really seen much in terms of, I think there's maybe got 1 or 2 other visits set up that maybe one, and I don't even know that I have a date on that, but I do know that he's had a date for Arkansas. We'll see what happens now. But I will, kind of reinforce this idea that when it's John Calipari, if he gets him on campus, now your chances vastly improve, in my opinion. His track record shows that. And I think he does a really good job of threading needles on the timing of things. So again, we'll see. I mean, again, there are people that still think Arkansas is in the lead there. We'll just see about that. But one of the things I will say to wrap this up on Caleb Wilson, I've said to you guys multiple times at 6'9", his versatility defensively, I think he can defend multiple positions. I've said this guy's the best two-way player in the country. And I think there was a list, and I don't know who put it out recently, but one of the national guys put out a list, and I think it was the top defenders in the 2025 class or in the country, regardless of class. I don't remember, but he listed 5 names, and Caleb Wilson was on it. So I just say that to say some of the things that my eyes are telling me, these things get backed up. And so his versatility to me on both sides of the ball, because he's an emerging offensive player as well. He's a guy that was up and down a little bit, and he worked on his game in June, had a really good July, and he showed maturity in certain ways. And then that two-way ability, man, this is a guy that, when you look at what's in Arkansas's wheelhouse, and not knowing yet what Cole Pete, maybe he's done with Arkansas, I don't know. But Caleb Wilson, I told you reasons why Malik Thomas is one of my favorite players. But when I look at just what he brings to the court, Caleb Wilson, I mean, this is a guy that to me is not only a future pro, but could really impact as a freshman, really have the potential to really impact what kind of season you have. All of these guys do, but it's very rare to look at a star player coming out of high school and talk about their defense like that, and that level of versatility. That is not as predominant when we're talking about these 5-star guys. And so I think there's value in that. I think there's value in how that can actually translate. It doesn't guarantee that it will. There are things in making that transition to the high major level from high school don't always work out right away for guys, but the potential's there. And when you're saying that on the defensive side of the ball for a guy that young, that could really help your team. All right, going to wrap it up. Thanks again for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I meandered today. I didn't have a list of anything in front of me. I just went all from the old pickle up above my eyes here, the old melon. But thank you for joining me. If you haven't done it already, please go hit subscribe and like. Please share the content if you can. But until next time, I appreciate you being here. And we'll catch up with you the next time. Thanks.